Hi everyone, welcome to Ask a Property Manager, episode number 88. I'm Andrew Schultz, principal broker of Own Buffalo Inc., and today is September 15th, 2021. We're coming to you from Studio 2.0 here at Own Buffalo, and we have quite a show for you today. We're going to be talking about builders who are struggling to keep up with the current demand for new housing. We're going to be talking about what happens when you default on a $165 million home loan, and we'll answer some questions from housing providers around the country. Before we jump into that, we are going to go ahead and plug our social media. New episodes of Ask a Property Manager drop every Wednesday, 10 a.m. Eastern on Facebook. You can catch those live on Facebook. You can also catch the replay the same day on Facebook as well as on YouTube. Don't forget about our Instagram. We post things there that don't make it on the other two platforms. And last but not least, don't forget about the current episode of the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. In this episode, we are taking a look at what to know when investing in multifamily properties, how to prove tenants actually caused the damage to your rental, and what to do with when an applicant accidentally reveals a red flag to you. Don't miss out on all that. It's a very, very good episode. New episodes of the podcast drop every other Thursday morning, anywhere podcasts are heard or over at rentprep.com/podcast. Definitely give this week's episode a listen. It's definitely worth it. We're going to go ahead and jump into our news of the day here, starting with this article coming out of CNBC. America is short more than 5 million homes, and builders cannot make up the difference. Anyone searching for a home today knows full well the pickings are slim. The supply of U.S. homes for sale is near a record low, and the gap between the supply and demand is widening. The U.S. is short 5.24 million homes, an increase of 1.4 million from the 2019 gap of 3.84 million, according to new research from Realtor.com. The U.S. Census found that 12.3 million American households were formed from January 12 to June 21, but just 7 million new single-family homes were built during that time. Single-family home construction has suffered from a severe labor shortage that began well before the pandemic, but was then exacerbated by it. Supply chain disruptions in the past year have pushed prices for building materials higher, and as pandemic-induced demand soared, prices for land increased as well. While new household formation is actually slower than it was before the pandemic, home builders would have to double their recent new production pace to close the gap in 5 to 6 years. A new household can be either owner-occupied or rented. The pandemic has certainly exacerbated the U.S. housing shortage, but data shows household formations outpaced new construction long before COVID. Put simply, new construction supply hasn't been meeting the demand over the last 5 years, said Realtor.com chief economist Danielle Hale. Millennials, many of whom are now in their 30s and even 40s, have debunked the industry's renter generation expectations. Household formation is when an individual moves out of a shared living situation. That's important to note because that's kind of what everything is based on here. Single-family home construction has been rising steadily since it bottomed in 2009 during the Great Recession. It is still not as high as it was just before the housing boom and is actually running at its slowest pace since 1995, according to the U.S. Census. The slower pace comes as the largest generation enters its typical home buying years. Pult Group, one of the nation's largest home builders, just lowered its Q3 and full-year guidance for home closings, citing supply chain interruptions. Despite the extraordinary efforts of our trade partners, the supply chain issues that have plagued the industry throughout the pandemic have increased during the second half of the year, CEO Ryan Marshall said in a release. We continue to work closely with our suppliers, but shortages for a variety of building products, combined with increased production volumes across the home building industry, are directly impacting our ability to get homes closed to our level of quality over the remainder of 2021. Other builders are citing the same issues. Some, including Pult, have said that they are slowing sales themselves in order to keep up with their backlog of demand. As a result, stocks of the builders have been trading significantly lower over the past week. Due to the shortage, prices for new and existing homes are rising at a record pace. For new construction, which has always come in a price premium, homes with a median value of $300,000, which is considered relatively affordable, represented 32% of builder sales in the first half of 2021, down from 43% during the same period in 2018. So essentially what they're saying here is the price of the property overall has gone up, which means that they're selling fewer homes in this price bracket. Builders simply cannot afford to produce cheap homes given their rising cost. No matter how you frame the scenario, it will be more meaningful. It will take a more meaningful shift in the pipeline to meet demand in the foreseeable future. So, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of different things at play here. You have the labor shortage, which obviously was an issue prior to COVID, and we all knew that, especially in the skilled trades. You also have the building supply material shortage, which has been plaguing us on and off in different parts of the building trades ever since the pandemic kicked off, you know, with lumber and then copper prices and blue electric junction boxes, the plastic junction boxes for electrical wiring. Very random, just a totally random. Appliances were a nightmare for a period of about 6 months. Just trying to find a basic refrigerator was almost impossible. So there's a lot going on there. I mean, it's no shock to anybody that we have a shortage of homes in the country right now. The problem is trying to get homes built when you don't have a labor pool and you don't have the materials to do it is pretty much impossible. And that's basically what these builders are beginning to say is until something changes, expect there to be more of this, not less of this. We're going to jump over to our next article, also from CNBC. This one is more of a holy cow type of a situation. The most expensive home in America defaults on $165 million in debt and heads for sale. So essentially, this was a speculative build mansion out in LA that has just gone completely awry. So let's go ahead and jump into this article. You can see the picture of this mammoth building here in the hills of Beverly, I believe. I lied, Bel Air. A Los Angeles mega mansion once expected to list for $500 million has gone into receivership after the owner defaulted on more than $165 million in loans and debt, according to court filings. The 105,000 square foot Bel Air estate, known as The One, was placed into receivership by the Los Angeles County Superior Court and is expected to be relisted at a lower price in the coming months, according to people familiar with the property. The receivership marks a stunning reversal for The One and its flashy developer, Niall Niami, who often touted the property as his life mission and the biggest, most expensive home in the urban world. Expected to hit the market in 2017, with a price tag of $500 million, The One has been dogged by repeated delays, funding problems, and changing strategies. The home stretches like an ultra-modern palace over 8 acres on a hilltop overlooking LA. It has 9 bedrooms, multiple kitchens, a nightclub, 4-lane bowling alley, salon, gym, 50-seat theater, a running track, and an underground garage for 50 cars with 2 auto turntables. Its 7 water features include multiple pools, jacuzzis. And features include multiple pools, a jacuzzi, and a moat that surrounds the house. The master bedroom suite is 4,000 square feet. That's bigger than most homes in Western New York. Every door in the house is electric, along with all the toilets. Niami had planned a jellyfish room and an ice bar, but both proved too costly. There's a lot of people out there with a lot of money. They want something no one else can have, Niami told CNBC in 2017, and this is it. Yet The One was one of dozens of spec mansions that rose up from the hills of Bel Air and Beverly Hills after 2014, when fashion magistrate Bruce Makowski sold a spec mansion in Beverly Hills for $70 million and kicked off a new California real estate gold rush. The building boom, an arms race of infinity pools, candy walls, auto galleries, and party rooms has led to a glut of real estate excess. Many LA mega homes, including several built by Niami, wound up selling for far less than their asking prices. Even as the prices were falling, he was loading up on debt to finish and promote The One. Over the past 4 years, Niami and his related LLC, Crestloyd, have borrowed more than $165 million to build and sell The One, according to property documents. The largest lender is Hankey Capital, founded by Los Angeles billionaire Don Hankey, which has over $115 million in loans on the property. Yogi Securities Holdings, led by doctor-turned-real estate investor Joseph Engelhoff, has loaned The One over $36 million. 2 other entities, Inferno Realty and Maybach Corporation Holdings, have provided loans of $7 million each. The One also has over $1 million in unpaid taxes and debts from concrete, air conditioning, and tool companies. Hankey served Niami with the notice of default in March. In July, the Los Angeles County Superior Court ordered the property be placed into receivership and named Ted Lanes of Lanes Management as the receiver. Under a receivership, a property that's defaulted is turned over to a court-appointed receiver, who then prepares the property for sale. In complex or large real estate projects, receiverships are often preferable to a foreclosure, where the lender or bank seizes the property. Rather than taking ownership and liabilities, which can add to the risks and delays, the receiver gets the needed permits, completes any needed construction work, compiles a list of creditors, and prepares the houses for a sale to pay off the lenders. A receivership also provides a notice period when lenders, creditors, and contractors who haven't been paid can make their case. Once it gets the proper permits and the certificate of occupancy for the one, it will be listed, Lane said. The price and timing have yet to be determined. What I would love to see happen is that the house gets completed, the certificate of occupancy is awarded, and we have an orderly sale that maximizes the value. Hopefully there will be significant proceeds from the sale to fund the secured and unsecured creditors and for the equity to realize some value. Naomi has been marketing the one for years with interviews and photos in the media and a special video tour in April with YouTube personality Michael Blakely, who touted the $500 million property as the biggest and most expensive home in the world. Naomi also talked about plans to turn the home into a media stage and a commercial venture, using it to host a potential Netflix show, events, and startup companies. Naomi put his West Hollywood home in bankruptcy last year, and a spec mansion in Beverly Hills, which he had marketed for $110 million, wound up selling for $38 million to one of the lenders of the property. Naomi had a listing agreement for the one with LA brokers Aaron Kerman of Compass and Rainey and Brandon Williams of the Williams & Williams Estates Group. Lane said the plan under the listing agreement had been to market the property for $288 million, but the ultimate listing price has not been set. It is unclear whether the property will sell at a high enough price to pay all of the debt. The most expensive home ever sold in LA was the former Warner estate in Beverly Hills, sold last year to Jeff Bezos for $165 million. While the real estate market in Los Angeles has rebounded after COVID, especially at the high end, the one may prove difficult to sell at the asking price. It's not an easy property to price. It's truly unique. So there you have it. That's what happens when you default on $165 million in debt. They take the property away from you. It's interesting that they used a receivership here as opposed to going in for the full foreclosure. Let me see if I can scroll down here and just find that part of the article. Right in here, talking about the receivership. So it's interesting they went the receivership route. I've only seen a receivership type of situation on one transaction in all the time that I've been in real estate, and it was actually an apartment complex that there was a default on the mortgage, and rather than move to a foreclosure action, the bank put it into receivership so that it could be continually operated. The bank didn't want to operate the property, so they assigned it to a receiver to continue to operate the property and basically prep it for sale. Ultimately, I think what wound up happening was the owner of the property was able to make good on the debt. They were able to restructure or do whatever it was that they needed to do, and they did save the property, so it was only in receivership for a short period of time. But it just goes to show you that you have to make sure that you have a competent receiver appointed by the courts on these properties. If you appoint somebody to manage an apartment complex that has never done that in their lives, they're not going to have a good time. So just something to think about. Obviously, it's probably a pretty uncommon thing for properties to drop into receivership, unless you're in a situation such as this where it's a monstrous property or it's a property that needs continual operations on it or something along those lines. So very interesting to see how the other half lives, and we will move from there into our humor for the day. I thought this was pretty funny. I think this is actually on a cruise line, towel animal left by the hotel staff. I thought that was kind of neat, and I wanted to share that. And then, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but we actually got our hands on some very early footage of Splinter from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This is back before he took his martial arts training and things of that nature, before he got the robes. This is an early photo of him, and I just wanted to share that. Now that we have taken a look at that, let's jump into our questions from housing providers around the country. We're going to start with this one on prepping a unit for vacation or vacancy. I have a tenant in a duplex in one of the two units that wants to go on vacation for 3 weeks to possibly 2 months. They want to know if they can shut the water off in the unit to prevent potential flooding or emergencies. 2 questions. Can they just turn off the water valves in the unit? And then second question, electric water heater, should we turn off or see if there's a vacation mode for lowering usage? My take on the water heater is if it ain't broken, don't fix it. So if they're on their own water meter, I would go ahead and shut it off right at the water meter. If they're not at their own, if there's only one water meter and it splits and goes to the two different units, at that point, go to the point closest to the water meter that doesn't interrupt the other tenant's usage. So you might have some shutoffs down in a basement or something like that that can be turned off. Otherwise, you might just be shutting the lines off at the shutoffs right before the device. Like if you're talking about a kitchen sink, you might be turning it off at the turnoffs underneath the sink, because that's the closest place that you have a shutoff to the water meter. So if that's the case, that's better than nothing. But realistically speaking, the best case scenario would be being able to shut it off right near the water meter. That would be the best possible scenario. I would recommend turning off the hot water tank. It'll save energy if nothing else. It'll save a little bit of wear and tear. So yeah, I would say go ahead and shut off the hot water tank if it's gas or if it's electric. If you have copper or PEX plumbing, my recommendation, and this actually came from my plumber, this was from a couple years ago when I was talking to him about this exact scenario. If you have a copper or a galvanized line, or I'm sorry, a copper or a PEX line, his recommendation is to go ahead and open the faucets after you have everything shut off, after you have the water shut off so that things can drain down a little bit. If you have a galvanized line, an older galvanized water line, his recommendation is leave everything closed and do not drain those lines. What happens is once the air gets into those lines, it causes additional corrosion. And when you go to turn the water back on again, you might find that one of those pipes has actually corroded shut from the inside. So his recommendation on galvanized is just, shut the water off, turn it off at the shutoffs, but don't do anything to relieve pressure or drain anything off the lines, because you might wind up with a bigger headache than what you started with. So if you're really feeling fancy, you can go ahead and drain the hot water tank after you shut it off, using a hose and the connection down at the bottom of the tank. Most manufacturers actually recommend doing that about once a year anyway, to clear any gunk and sediment out of the bottom of the tank to help improve the lifespan of the hot water tank. You got to remember, in a gas hot water tank, the heating element's all the way down at the bottom. So if it has to sit and heat through a bunch of gunk and sediment, it's going to make it less effective. On an electric unit, kind of a similar situation, you have those anodized rods inside, and you might be able to prolong the life of those by turning off the tank and draining it down and clearing all the sediment and build out. So that would be something that I would recommend doing, even once a year as a rule. We don't typically do it, to be honest with you. I don't think it makes a massive difference. But if you're already at that stage, it might be something that you want to do. Don't forget to shut off the tank before you drain the tank. Otherwise, you are literally creating a pressurized container. If you have a hot, like a gas tank, you're creating a pressurized container that's gonna, it's got a blow-off valve, but make sure you turn off the tank before you drain the tank, and then make sure you fill the tank before you turn it back on again. Those would be the two warnings that I would have. Maybe put some stickers around the house letting people know that the hot water tank is off and drained and needs to be filled and turned on in that order when going to dewinterize the property. Trying to see if there was anything else in my notes here that I wanted to make sure that I covered. Oh, if you're in a cold weather climate, make sure that you set the thermostat to 55 degrees just to make sure the thermostat is in heat mode, and make sure that it's set to at least 55 degrees just in case. Don't set it to the off position. Don't turn it down to 30 degrees. You're going to wind up with frozen everything in your house. My recommendation is, as the housing provider, if you know somebody's going to be gone for several weeks and they've notified you of it, go in like once a week, once every couple weeks, and just double check the property. When we used to have our student rentals around the holiday season, we would go through all of the student rentals after the kids went home for break and double check to make sure that waters were set the way they were supposed to be and that thermostats were turned on and things like that. And we never really had any major issues as a result. We had one property that a line broke, actually a supply line broke on a toilet and flooded a house one time, but it was actually a failure of the line, not a failure of anything else. It was a manufacturer defect. There was no way we were going to stop that from the get-go. I do know of a couple of other landlords, though, that didn't go in and check the thermostats to make sure that the heat was turned on, and all of the water pipes froze and burst and flooded their houses out with massive damages. So yeah, definitely be cautious of the climate that you're in. If you're in a situation where you might wind up with hot damage or cold damage, make sure you're doing whatever you can to protect yourself against that. This is good advice for good advice for prepping for either a vacant unit or for a longer vacation. So that's good information to have. Moving on to our next question, buy the company or buy the property? I'm in the process of retiring. I'm wondering if anyone knows if it's better to sell properties outright or to sell the business. I have 2 properties in an LLC and both have Section 8 tenants in place. Both are planning on staying in the properties. Any suggestions would be greatly appreciated. Generally speaking, I think you're going to want to sell the properties and not the corporate structure here. Most people are not going to want to buy your corporate structure, and the reason for that is pretty straightforward. They don't know what other debts and obligations are tied to that corporate structure. So for instance, you might have, in this instance, you mentioned an LLC, so we'll go with an LLC. You might have an LLC that owns 3 houses and also a company pickup truck for moving materials around and stuff like that. So you have 3 mortgages and an auto loan. Well, if somebody's buying the company, they're going to be responsible for all of that. Versus if they're buying just one property, for instance, they're only going to be responsible for the one loan in their name for that property. So most people are not going to want to buy your corporate structure unless there's a really, really good reason to, and unless you can prove absolute that there are no outstanding debts and obligations that haven't been accounted for as part of the deal. Most people are not going to want to buy your corporate structure. So when someone buys a property, they don't want to have to worry about everything that was happening during your ownership period. They want that clean break, and they want to make sure that they own the property outright without any headaches. Selling the property with a clean title is the surefire way to assure them of that fact. You're going to want to speak to an accountant, and you're going to want to speak to an attorney before you jump into any of this. Especially if you're talking about retiring, you might have capital gains taxes that you need to consider and things of that nature. So it's time to talk to an accountant and it's time to talk to a real estate attorney before you make any move in turning around and trying to sell those properties. Warranty of habitability. We've talked about this one a couple times in the past. Is it a landlord's responsibility to provide a draft-free door? The previous tenants used weather stripping and some came off, and the new tenant wants me to replace it. I already have some that I'm glad to give them to try. If it is the wrong size, do I have to buy the right size? Yes, you should fix this. Weather stripping is not terribly expensive. A drafty door not only means that heated air is getting out or cooled air is getting out, it also means that there's a point of ingress for rodents, for bugs, for whatever the case may be. You want doors to have, doors and windows really, to have a nice weather-tight seal, which it doesn't sound like you have in this instance. It sounds like you need to get some weather stripping on here. And the other thing is, it sounds like you were asking about having the tenant complete the repair. This is a DIY 15-minute type fix with about 10 minutes or $10 worth of materials from Home Depot. You can absolutely do this. Don't ask your tenant to do it. Take care of your responsibility as a landlord. So I want to talk briefly about the warranty of habitability. We're going to switch to desktop mode here. And this is the actual law here in the state of New York. Let me see if I can enlarge this a little bit. You can see this comes right off the New York State Senate's website. This is from the RPL, the Real Property Law, Section 235B, Warranty of Habitability. Real Property, RPP, Chapter 50, Article 7. Warranty of habitability. In every written and oral lease or rental agreement for a residential premises, so every lease, the landlord or lessor shall be deemed to covenant and warrant that the premises is so leased or rented and all areas used in connection therewith all areas used in connection therewith in common with other tenants or residents are fit for human habitation and for the uses reasonably intended by the parties. I'm going to stop there. Essentially what they're saying here is every lease for every residential structure inside the apartment and in all common areas. That's what we've read so far. Every lease on a residential unit in the apartment and in the common areas are fit for human habitation and for the uses reasonably intended by the parties, and that the occupants of such premise shall not be subjected to any conditions which would be dangerous, hazardous to or detrimental to their life, health, or safety. When any such condition has been caused by the misconduct of the tenant or the lessee, or persons under his direction or control, it shall not constitute a breach of such covenants and warranties. So essentially, landlord has a responsibility and a duty to repair things that would be Dangerous, hazardous, detrimental to life, health, and safety. Obviously, there's a certain level of interpretation there, but we're not going to jump into that. That's a matter for the courts. When any such condition has been caused by the misconduct of the tenant or their guests, it does not constitute a breach of such covenants and warranties. So, for instance, you have to provide windows in your property, okay? They have to open, they have to close, etc., etc. If a tenant throws a brick through your front window, you're not responsible for that repair. The tenant's responsible for that repair. You're probably going to conduct the repair and then back bill the tenant for it, but that's not something that would fall under a warranty of habitability claim because it was the tenant that caused, or a tenant's guest or whatever, that caused that window to be broken. So that's where the warranty of habitability kicks in. You have a responsibility up to a certain point, and then if it's caused by the tenant, it's the tenant's responsibility, not yours, and they can't come on to you for a warranty of habitability claim in the event that you, or in the event that they caused the issue. We'll jump back to the question at large here. So going back to the question at large here, now that we've talked a little bit more about what the actual warranty of habitability is here in the state of New York, and we have a little bit better understanding of that, yeah, go ahead and fix this. It makes sense. Is this something that is warranty of habitability? It's probably pretty close to borderline, in my opinion. Going back to let's go back to our definition here real quick. Go back to desktop. Fit for human habitation. Drafty door does not make an apartment uninhabitable. Uses reasonably intended by the parties. They can still live. And the occupant shall not be subjected to any conditions that would be dangerous, hazardous, or detrimental to their life, health, or safety. Could you make an argument there? Of course you could. You could make an argument there in a lot of instances. Is this something, this particular repair, is this something that's a violation of warranty of habitability? Again, that's something that a court would decide. It's well above the scope of what I would decide. But realistically speaking, I would take care of this just as a course of action anyway to prevent the possible ingress of vermin or bugs and to prevent my tenants' hot or cold air from getting out of the place. And it's doubly so if we're paying for the utilities, because then it's literally, you're paying for money to fly out the window and fly out the door. So the bottom line here is really just take care of your properties. Make sure that you're maintaining your properties, and then you don't have to worry about these concerns over the course of time. So that pretty much wraps things up for this week's episode of Ask a Property Manager. Thank you all so much for watching. We truly do appreciate it. You can help us to improve Ask a Property Manager by dropping a question in the comments, either on Facebook or on YouTube, and your question may be picked up and answered in an upcoming episode. If you enjoyed this content, or if we brought some value to your day, do us a favor and hit that thumbs up button. YouTube and Facebook both push videos based on community feedback, so every like, comment, subscribe, and share helps us to grow and reach more people. We'll be back next week on September 22nd. That's next Wednesday, 10 a.m. Eastern, with another show you won't want to miss. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.